The English language is used throughout the world in commerce, the world of business, and has become a cultural medium, particularly because of the influence of Hollywood and because of the influence of the music industry. But the English language itself is formidable. If we look at the example of the largest dictionary in history, the Oxford English Dictionary, which has taken over 100 years to compile, there are now over 800,000 words recorded in use in English since the first words were published in about, well, written and published from the time of Beowulf, the oldest saga in the English language, which was not written until several hundred years after its first creation. But the English language is very large. However, the average person does not have a vocabulary greater than perhaps 10,000 words. That's still quite a few. Shakespeare, we are now able to compute, had a vocabulary of over 20,000 words. But it doesn't matter when we talk about these enormous numbers. How is it we use the words that are at our command? And how do we command these words to convince others of what we want to persuade them to think? In the time of Athens, in Greece, in the democracy, the first democracy, every person was expected to be able to plead his case in a court of law, or in the Senate, or before the group demos, meaning mob, group, the democracy. And the form that we have learned from that is what we call the classical rhetoric. In the classical rhetoric, we talk about how we persuade and convince. And a lawyer, an attorney in a court of law says, let the evidence show. And he strives to win an acquittal for his client if accused of a crime. We need to convince and persuade with language. And the simplest form we have is what we call declarative sentence. Subject, verb, object. The character Confucius used to play a simple flute over and over and over again. His mother became so distracted. She said, Confucius, why do you keep playing that simple tune on that little flute? And he said, Mother, once I master this tune on this simple flute, I can play any tune or song on this flute, and I can probably play any other instrument. It's a matter of mastering the simple, taking control of that to then expand to the greater object. What I have been teaching for years is basic English grammar. The sentence, the paragraph, the essay, which then becomes the college paper or the master's thesis or the doctoral dissertation. I've written all, and I have trained people in doing all. And today I'm going to talk about that simple declarative sentence. And I want to show the two books that I have used. Keys for Writers, which has little tabs for finding each form of the grammar, and Elements of Style, a book written, well, in 1916, a little, about 100 years ago at Dartmouth College, and has been used by writers throughout the world in English. And I've been using it since I was in college myself at the University of Pennsylvania and at all the universities where I've taught since then. University of California, University of Miami, University of Maryland, and through several centers in Spain. I will start with the simplest declarative sentence, which will be subject and verb and object. John wants food. There could not be anything more basic in our human condition than desiring to have food. It is our first impulse with our birth to seek food. John wants food. That is what we call a transitive sentence, because we have the subject, the verb, and the verb takes a noun as its object, food. However, we can have an intransitive sentence, which is also a declarative sentence. John eats. Now there's no object, so we call that an intransitive sentence. I think of it like a transmission on an automobile. Transitive, what does it transfer to? But we can make that transitive too, because John eats food. Of sentences. The simple sentence, this is the simple statement, simple declarative sentence. We then have what we call the compound sentence, and then there is the complex, and then we can have the complex compound sentence. Be not dismayed. I'm going to take you very simply through this and show you how this works. The compound sentence is, for example, John wants food. And eats in a restaurant. We have here two complete thoughts, two what we call main clauses, joined together with this word which is called a conjunction. And the conjunction that joins two main clauses is called a coordinating conjunction. The other forms are and, or, but, for. And also we can join these two thoughts together as a compound sentence with this mark of punctuation, a semicolon. That will also join them together. I will get on to the semicolon when I get on to the colon, when I get on to the use of the comma and period, as soon as I finish with this. The next form of a sentence, of course, is the complex sentence. And the complex sentence is that sentence which is introduced by a subordinate conjunction, if, when, because, although. These are what we call subordinating conjunction. And they create the subordinate clause. For example, when John wants food, he goes to a restaurant. Now, I once had a professor teaching philosophy who had a degree also in English, who said that all of civilization derives from a subordinate clause. But we cannot live satisfactorily in a subordinate clause because that is what we then call later a fragment sentence. It's an incomplete thought. It needs the main clause to complete the thought. When John wants food. So, don't leave us hanging there. He'll starve to death. No. He goes to a restaurant. Perhaps that is the end purpose of all. So he goes to a restaurant, and then comma, and we'll make this a subordinate, coordinating another main clause, and he goes home to sleep. There we have a complex compound sentence. So, we take sentences and put them together in paragraphs. And we put paragraphs together on a page. And we put those together in chapters, which then are put together in an entire essay or book, novel, thesis, master's thesis, doctoral dissertation. In the last two books I've written, I have begun with frontispieces that describe and explain what I'm going to do. Some books have epilogues which tell what you have done. When I teach public speaking, the classical rhetoric, the spoken form, I say, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. Basic structure in English. In the classical rhetoric, that which was first taught in Greece and later in Rome and then in our schools throughout the world in various languages, the Romance languages, of course, are French and Spanish. Those that derive from the Roman world, the Romance, those are inflected languages. But English is a language which is word order. The word order is important. But the way we use the language in the classical rhetoric, we have definition, and to define something is basically to show boundaries. How far does it go? Where does the line stop between black and white? Well, definition, and then we have the next form, comparison, contrast. And then the next form, classification, where we have three different examples rather than just two, explaining the definition between the two. And cause and effect, which we use mostly with because of this, this happened. If this should be, so this will come to pass, is used to persuade, to convince, to get the reader to go into action or to take some action or to be convinced. But as I said before, as I began by saying, the lawyer goes into the court and says, let the evidence show. What is the evidence? In a court of law, it must be prima facie. It must be what is called hard evidence. It is illustrative. It is corroborative. It is substantive. It is substantially substantive and irrefutable. I often begin teaching a class by holding up an orange. I ask my students to describe the orange in its static state. Talk about the color, talk about the skin, talk about what is inside. Describe that orange and then go into a dynamic form, open that orange, make it into juice, or take the fragments out and make a lovely breakfast or dessert. Make it dynamic. Take an apple and compare the apple to the orange, comparison, contrast. Take an apple, an orange, and another kind of fruit entirely, a banana. And you're into classification, which is taking three different forms. As a navigator, when I was a sailor, I was trained as a ocean yacht master. We learned to take three readings on point to get a fixed datum, which is that old form of the Maltese cross to tell us where we were. In navigation, you take 3 bearings. You triangulate to find your position. And that is classification. And cause and effect speaks for itself. In the teaching of English, I have used certain handy handouts to give my students, and I'm going to read the Handy Hints for English Composition by Ben Wright, which I've used for, well, I began teaching in my old secondary school. I was hired by my English teacher, who was also my physics teacher, since she also held a degree as an electrical engineer, as well as a master's in English from Columbia University. But I learned to teach English there to prepare students in their final year to go on to our major universities in America, Ivy League universities, universities throughout America. And here are the handy hints I worked out. This is called Ben Wright's Handy Hints for English Composition. Good grammar is clear expression of ideas with illustrative, specific examples to substantiate and persuade the reader. Some bad habits in writing may interfere with this simple process. Below are some factors, below in this statement, that may not have been mentioned in your grammar text or your style guide. And I'm going to send this list along with this presentation. 1, never use contractions. An easy way to remember this is do not write don't. Click. Do not write don't. Got it? D-O-N''T. Do not write don't. When writers are in the habit of saying I would of, it's because they are also in the habit of writing would, ''ve, the contraction of would have. Some writers and some people make errors by hearing the word whether as weather, the word for our weather, or where as were. Another very strong suggestion I make is do not address your writer as you. Don't lecture or point your finger at your writer. It sounds like a command when you use you, or an undesired intimacy, like a salesperson trying to put his or her arm around you saying, this is just the automobile for you. Oh, this is your color. This is, and you feel as if the person is, well, trying to sell you in the hard sell way. It's all too easy to slip into colloquial or slangish language if the word you is used. So use one to refer to your subject as your reader, even though it sounds somewhat pretentious at times. Do not fall into the overly familiar you. Now, some phrases and words become clumsy and lead to grammatical snarls, knotting up of logic and expression. Expressions such as fact that or due to sometimes becomes due to the fact that. It's presuming that you have already convinced your reader that it is a fact, and the argument of persuasion is still ongoing. Another thing to avoid is for all intents and purposes. Sometimes that becomes almost as a joke, for all intensive purposes, and it's silly. Cliches. Avoid cliches like the plague. That is a cliche, obviously. Do not get caught red-handed with them. That is also a cliche, and it's meant as a joke. But try to avoid expressions, words like yet and got as well. Never begin a sentence with a coordinating conjunction which rightfully belongs to 2 main clauses. Remember I said and, or, but, for, and so? Don't start your sentences with coordinating conjunctions. And remember that when you use subordinating conjunctions, make sure that that subordinating conjunction with the subordinate clause that follows it is then accompanied and corroborated by and substantiated by a main clause. The semicolon and the colon and the other marks of punctuation I want to get to now. We have the major forms of punctuation in the English language that are described thus. We have the comma, we have the period, we have the colon, and the semicolon. The semicolon is a combination of a period and a comma. Colon is like two periods, more than full stop. It's usually to present an entire catalog. Comma, period, colon. We also have, of course, the exclamation mark, which literally derives from the old BAM dagger stuck in the proclamation on the wall where you want people to pay attention. But we only use this in very extreme examples, the exclamation mark. It is meant to exclaim, and it is meant to say, thus it is so. Now, the use of the comma. We could have this: he eats, shoots, and leaves. There is no comma there. There's only one period. We must presume that this is describing the actions of a koala bear in its eucalyptus tree in Australia, feeding itself. He eats, shoots, and leaves. But if we put a comma, he eats, comma, shoots, and leaves, it could be some Western outlaw from some old film who comes into the bar, has his glass of red-eye whiskey and a big steak, pulls out his pistol and shoots at one of the bottles behind the bar, or at the barman himself, and leaves. In the grand old tradition of these honky-tonk cowboy tales. That is the power of a comma. The period, of course, is full stop. The British call the period full stop. It means stop, halt, end of the sentence, end of thought. The colon and the semicolon, I have been using one sentence for quite some time to explain to people how best to use the colon. You do not use the semicolon as a comma, ever. That can then make a sentence really confusing. But it can be used in place of the coordinating conjunction. But here, let me show you how we may use the colon and the semicolon correctly. All right, I take this simple sentence. I went to the zoo and saw the animals. Okay? Colon. I'm going to tell you what animals I saw. All right? The crocodile in his pool, semicolon. The monkeys in their tree, semicolon, and the tiger, comma, in his cave, period. Now, because these are phrases in series, they are separated by the semicolon. Crocodile in his pool, the monkeys in their tree, the tiger in his cave. However, if I make these just simple words instead of phrases, then the semicolon is not used. It's not necessary. And they're separated by commas. A very easy way to remember it, but a confusing business that I think the only person that used the semicolon in any grand manner was Thomas Jefferson in his Declaration of Independence. The entire first page is covered with semicolons. But the man I'm going to talk about just in a minute, Kurt Vonnegut, claimed that he never, ever used the semicolon. But he never used in any of his books, and I've read almost everything he's written. He did use this book, The Elements of Style, which I recommend to everyone. I've used it since I was at a major Ivy League university as an honors English major, I'm proud to say, University of Pennsylvania. And it's used in every major university I've ever taught in. And I know many, many writers, it's one of the main books I see in their personal library. And I'm going to read you now a statement by Kurt Vonnegut. And I shall erase, well, this in a minute. I'm going to leave that up there so that it does intend to teach. This is by Kurt Vonnegut, How to Write with Style, and I'm just going to read a part of it, but it is to the point. Newspaper reporters and technical writers are trained to reveal almost nothing about themselves in their writing. This makes them freaks in the world of writers, since almost all other ink-stained wretches in that world reveal a lot about themselves to readers. We call these revelations accidental and intentional elements of style. These revelations tell us as readers what sort of person it is with whom we're spending time. Does the reader sound ignorant or informed, stupid or bright, crooked or honest, humorless or playful, and on and on? Why should you examine your writing style with the idea of improving it? Do so as a mark of respect for your readers, whatever you're writing. If you scribble your thoughts any which way, your writers will surely feel you care nothing about them. They will mark you down as an egomaniac or a chowderhead, or worse, they will stop reading you. The most damning revelation you can make about yourself is that you do not know what is interesting and what is not. Do you not yourself dislike or like a writer mainly for what he or she chooses to show you to make you think about? Did you ever admire an empty-headed writer for just his or her mastery of the language? No. So your own winning style must begin with ideas in your head. Find a subject you care about and which you feel in your heart others should care about, and it's this genuine caring, not your games with language, which will be the most compelling and seductive element in your style. Do not ramble. I won't ramble on about that, but keep it simple. As for your use of language, remember the two great masters of language, William Shakespeare and James Joyce, wrote sentences that were almost childlike when their subjects were most profound. Remember, James Joyce is best known for Quark from sentences intricate as glittering as a necklace for Cleopatra. But my favorite sentence in his short story, Evelyn, is this one, quote, "She was tired." At that point in the story, no other words could break the heart of a reader as those three words do. Simplicity of language is not only reputable, but perhaps even sacred. The Holy Bible of the Christian, from the Jews, opens with a sentence well within the writing skills of any 14-year-old. Quote, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth." End of quote. I myself often read chapter 12 of Ecclesiastes from that same Bible, although I read from the Gilgamesh, and I read from the Iliad, and I read from the Aeneid, and I read even from the Beowulf to my students. But I read in Ecclesiastes because there's this one line, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." But in that same book appears the statement that I think is most important to remember to finalize my presentation, and I hope I have served you in showing you how to keep it simple, how to master that language, how to master that grammar that some people find. I think it was Robin Williams in the film Dead Poets Society says to his students, we're going to talk about grammar, we're going to talk poetry, talk about poetry. I know these are subjects you would really avoid as much as you would root canal work by a dentist, but grammar can be fun. Grammar can become a song. And that expression from the Bible that I want to leave you with is, in the beginning was the Word. And of course, I give you my word, and I give you my blessing, and hope that you can have as much joy in learning to feel comfortable with this English language and English expression as I do. Thank you.